and very grateful for having this opportunity to address and thank you for taking time out on a weekday. I'd like to begin with a minute's silence, the gruesome act that we've just been a witness to. I'd like to spend a minute just a silent prayer to the family of Shraddha. So if we can just close our eyes and just send our prayerful message, solidarity to them. Thank you. About 5 years ago, or maybe more, there was a tweet by an anonymous handle. And it simply said, "You might have power, but they have your children." It got me thinking, right? What are the structures that inform worldviews? How do people make decisions? What is the role of psychological comfort in what we seek? And what does political power mean to any of these things? It is then that I seriously began to examine what are the structures that we have, what constitutes our education system, what role does culture play, how do parents cope with this? A lot of things that we do at Bruhat today actually are an extension of those questions and continued meditation for the last 4 or 5 years and work, particularly in the last 3 years around this. We call ourselves culture creative. We work in 3 areas. We work on cultural storytelling. We look at Indian knowledge systems based educational research. We also do some research on ecology that we hope to scale up in future. And we invest and we work with people very heavily to help them understand what are the issues, the concepts, and the temperaments required to work in the civilizational space. So 3 areas of work that I'm going to talk about as our sphere of activity: cultural storytelling, IKS-based education, and leadership development for the long haul. But we don't see this as three different, distinct, disparate activities. We see these as one. And I'll try and explain the background context to why we do what we do and how we look at the levels of analysis in this. So, moment in time, if you look at the generic debates in public policy or structures, there's always a constant tension and give and take between what you might call incrementalism versus what you might call a radical upheaval, right? And different people, according to their temperaments and their worldviews, probably align on different sides of the spectrum. But there are some issues now, particularly if you look at the macro crisis, and we are increasingly hear this. In fact, even in the ongoing G20 summit, you might hear everybody is talking about a multi-crisis. Right? What does it mean? What are they trying to get at? Is that these are not, when you look at poverty, when you look at immigration, when you look at environmental related issues, when you look at pandemic, when you look at loneliness, when you look at xenophobia, these are not different disparate crises. There is a singular and perhaps a very God-sized void that is generating all of these things. Right? So some of the thinkers were trying to articulate for a fundamental shift in the philosophies, in the metaphysics of the self, that will then generate actions at the institutional level. They began calling out the need to look at these crises as a singular whole and the action to be concerted. Daniel Christian Wall is one of them, and he said something that was striking to me. He said, "We must do the improbable because the plausible has become unbearable." What is he hinting at? Right? Some of the actions, when you think about environment, when you think about immigration, they might look very out there. Right? How do you win? If you look at the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals vocabulary and the framing, there is an inherent contradiction in the framing itself. Right? You have whatever number of goals that you have, but smack in the middle of those 17 goals, you have something called economic development. And the nature of economic development, the structures that are underpinning the institutional architecture that generates that are, are those that are generating all of the crisis. So there is a hypocritical kind of framing there that you are not pointing to the root of this issue, but you're hoping to resolve all of the other issues that this one generates. So I said, if you have to think about solving this crisis, you'll probably have to think about doing the impossible. And sometimes it's just the cognitive shift. It's not so much the radical upheaval in a societal sense. It is about altering the ideas around a good life. And that is where, if you explore that further, the whole Dharmic exceptionalism, if you will, and the idea that India has a role would perhaps have a greater consonance once we think about that and situate that in the context of global crisis. The second question that we have is why is it that Hindus, particularly those of us who care for civilizational consensus, why do we have so little policy currency? Why do we struggle to find policy support for issues that we know are true? Shabarimala comes to mind. There are any number of issues, right? In the audience we have stalwarts here who have written about this, about the Hindu concerns. Why is there this chasm, this separation between what is needed for culture and what the state sponsors? And is there a way in which we can bridge that gap? And that is also the guiding philosophy of Bruhat itself. When we thought about the idea that we want to work on, the three central themes Sri Aurobindo talks about Indian philosophy: Satyam, Rita, Bruhat. There is an eternal truth, and when the design of things that you create in any context, it could be an organizational context, it could be your family, it could be an institution that you design, if it is absolutely consonant with the design of the truth, and if you're manifesting in your design the way it is conceived, then it expands because there is an alchemy between what was envisioned and how it is manifesting. So, Bruhat, or expansion in the Indian philosophy from from philosophical perspective, is about the idea and the manifestation of that idea being completely tied together. And if you were to just think about the state design, the institutions that we have, and the culture, and what is people's story about themselves, about their identity, today the Bruhat that we can have about Indian civilization has not yet happened because there is a chasm between the design, the original philosophy, and the way it has manifested and percolated down into our institutions. The institutions could be political, they could be social, they could be cultural, they could be economic. There is a lot of work to do, and these are not esoteric claims. There is a responsibility here when we make this claim that we also have to show how it works and situates itself in the current context of the global world. Right? So when we talk about culture compatible public policy, it is also increasingly being recognized in the Western academic literature itself. In fact, there is a new paradigm of public policy, if you will, which has been articulated as the culture evolutionary behavioral paradigm of public policy. If you think about public policy as waves, the first wave was perhaps the neoclassical wave, right, which had a metaphysics of reason as underpinning the self. Then you had some breakthrough in behavioral economics, which said that no, we are not really all rational. There are some emotional impulses that seem to dominate our choice making. So all the idea about markets being self-organizing because rational actors acting in their self-interest are able to come together, and that creates a marketplace. That got a little bit of a jolt. Obviously, it's not completely dismantled, and it should not be also perhaps, but it got a bit of a challenge from the idea of people not as entirely rational beings. The elephant and the rider metaphor comes to mind. The elephant is the one that actually controls the rider. It is the subconscious brain where all of our emotional impulses reside. Our choices are mostly governed by those, and we are not entirely rational. So, what does it do to the philosophy of economics itself? That got further compounded if you think about the third phase with advances in neurosciences, right, with the idea of how the brain is mapped, what is a stimulus and response. So there's a lot of work around that. The fourth wave, which is being advocated by professors like Michael Muthukrishna, takes into account the evolutionary nature and the cultural nature of decision making. Right? This is something that's not mainstream yet, but I see a lot of consonance between this and a dharmic way of thinking, where you also take into account what we call a dual inheritance, right? Culture, biology, evolution, all of these things combined into a metaphysics of the self that are able to guide, and that is what we built our civilization on. So, one of the challenges that we think we have is to combine culture and policy together, and that's the work that we do at Bruhat. But what is the obstacle here, or what are we challenging? What are we up against? So it's easy to think about each of our problems uniquely, but I think we need to expand our gaze and look at the multiple units of analysis possible, right from the individual all the way up to nation states. If you look at whatever it is, the decisions that individuals are making today, and Pankaj will elaborate this in his context for Shatrubodh and Swayambodh and what you need to build to have a lattice work of ideas. But there is a very powerful natural organic alliance at multiple levels, which makes our job all the more difficult. What are these levels and how can we think about it? Now, think about the nation state. The highest imagination that we have of a collective today, fortunately or unfortunately, is a nation state. That is the idea and identity that we have. You're an Indian, you're a British, whatever it is, right? And then you create certain multilateral institutions to take care of the commons. But fundamentally, the imagination ends at nation state. At the nation state level, you have the power of liberal atheism, in my opinion, is that it is a foreign policy tool for the Western nations. For the Western civilization, it becomes something that they can export to weld the cultural attitudes and the aspirations of people all across the world. And that generates market power, that generates the soft power can be converted into hard power through policy. We see this normally in the discourse of rights. Right? How does it get institutionalized in the form of rights, in the form of judicial interventions, in the form of state design itself? All of that comes, we know, from the Enlightenment metaphysics. So it is not just a matter of ideas, but there is a hard currency of the ideas converting into public policy. Right? Then you think about what is the next biggest acting force. Think about the capital class, the transnational elite. There are many global institutions today who play that role. Think about WEF and others. What is their incentive in propagating, in believing, and in sort of endorsing the liberal atheist vibe? It is a natural expansion into new markets. There is an organic incentive. It is in their interest to spread that. Think about academia, where ideas about identity are generated and spread. That is the nub. A lot of us who've been in this realize the connection between what starts in the academia, what percolates through the media, then gets institutionalized as policy. You might have seen. I'm speaking to you in Delhi. I was told that there is a gender sensitization curriculum now in primary schools in Delhi. Where is that coming from? Did it actually originate anywhere in India? Right? So, for the turn that academia has taken in the Western world towards New Left, and what is the incentive that they have? Right? The incentive there is perhaps ideological. It is a belief of shaping the world in their view, in their vision of the world. It's a very powerful natural incentive. Technocrats. A lot of our culture is now mediated through the digital platforms that we use. I come from the game development background. I have a little bit of exposure to powerful immersive experiences and how they almost entirely rewire our neural pathways. We used to do this in our design choices ourselves. So for us, when we think about a technocratic vision, it is just the thrill of success when you see millions of people all over the world following the design that you have created. It is productizable. And creating that product glory where you have so many people consuming the design that you have conceived is a huge entrepreneurial victory. So you have the technocrats who are naturally aligned to a liberal atheistic vibe. And then artists. We're going through a phase in the world history now where I would say that a lot of our meaning making, whether we recognize it or not, is based on the images that are surfaced to us. Highly curated, sophisticated, good looking, glossy images. that we consume relentlessly that have rewired the aesthetics in our neural pathways. And this is very important. Sometimes, we probably don't think enough about what this means. When we talk to our uh, children, or when we talk about the cultural artifacts that we have, let's think about a cow. Let's think about any other cultural image that comes to us, Bharat. Okay? Are most of us, but including the next generation, all of us are consuming content through our phones, and there are highly refined aesthetic images which are filtered when we consume that through our phones in the way the platforms are curated, which means that we are wiring ourselves to imagine certain things which are very pleasing all the time. And there is, of course, neurologically, the whole idea of dopamine that kicks in, which feeds into your raga and dvesha, and it is put on steroids. Now, you take the kid out into the real world, and he looks at a cow on a dusty street. There is a natural kind of schizophrenia there. What I'm consuming, what I'm liking, what I'm imagining, what I'm building in my mind as the word image connection does not correspond to what I see here. And when I see something that distorts my idea, my natural response is to fall back to my digital world where it is curated for me. All the experiences are actually made to appear that they've been curated for me personally. We call this mass personalization. Amazon curates all the choices that you make. Every other platform curates all the things that you are supposed to enjoy. What happens? How do we learn? We learn when we face adversity. Learning, like Sri Aurobindo said, we perfect the world through our stumbling. That process of fundamental learning, where you entertain something that is not fitting into your worldview, where you encounter an alternate point of view, where you encounter an alternate image, where you start challenging the decisions that you've already made in a prefabricated manner, is how we learn, and that learning endures. Today, that is hijacked by the idea of customized, highly refined, aesthetic, personalized experiences, which are supplied into the palm of our hands incessantly 24 by 7, 365. So that's a big challenge that we are not able to rewire. So, therefore, cultural content, when we think about cultural rewiring for the civilizational discourse, we need to take into account the aesthetics of the design and how we are able to supply this as a word image association. Right? And artists, they are naturally aligned to the liberal vibe because it is going against the grain that is considered modern art. Right? Art has taken a turn where anything that actually emphasizes continuity and tradition is not seen as innovative enough. And there is a natural tendency also to have self-expression as the be-all and end-all. Right? So there is that challenge. And finally, what does it mean to individuals? All the choices, all the alignment of actors and incentives, from nation state to capital class to markets to artists and technocrats, all of this distills down to one thing. It is that at an individual level, we get a moral sanction for our indulgence. Culture is supposed to be the restraint. Culture is supposed to actually help us align our life with Purushartha in the Indian philosophy. But today you have put some dimensions, particularly the Kama dimension, particularly the Artha dimension on steroids, and you have obfuscated all the Dharmic interplay. So therefore, as individuals, when you're offered this choice, our willpower is weak. Culture, if you think about a vrata, if you think about the cultural mechanisms that we had, they were built to actually give us a taste of renunciation in small doses. That was the civilizational design. We do not have that today. And when you do not have that, naturally, if you think about your own samskara formation process from a yogic perspective, you are just an automated machine. That is the challenge where you have all these powerful actors, their natural incentives working in consonance to advance a liberal atheist worldview. And when you have that, choices that individuals make about freedom, freedom which is much in discussion in the last 2 days due to the ghastly incident that has shaken all of us, the idea of freedom, the idea of liberty, and the way it governs choices is informed by, I would say, this synchronized symphony that's happening at multiple levels. So if you have to work on cultural rewiring, and if you have to, if you have a civilizational worldview, then we said at Bruhat, we said there needs to be three things that we need to work on. That is really the backdrop of why we do and what we do. One, if you're going through this phase and this era in history and an epoch in history where the personal has become the ideological, which means that I will do a performative act as long as it is an act of self-expression which feeds into my idea of myself. Think about the protest culture, think about the whole things that we see in social media and other design. It is not it is not a moral question alone. It is a de facto mode that we've gotten into, right? So you cannot address this by sermonizing. You cannot address this by asking for restraint. I think the scope of that is limited. You need to get into the mediums and the messages that are rewiring the neurology, which means that you need to tell your stories in a manner that when people go through a personal situation, and that personal situation could be anxiety, it could be envy, it could be accomplishment, it could be a breakup, it could be it could be something that I've not done before, facing discomfort. Do we have stories, metaphors, analogies that people draw from their culture, from our culture in this case, to actually make decisions? What is the voice that is residing inside people's minds today? Is that story yours? Is that example yours? Is that metaphor, that allegory yours? Or is that coming from somewhere else? Unless we are able to create content, unless we are able to reside in spaces where people consume that content, and unless we are able to do it aesthetically to actually give that a chance of becoming a part of our neural system, we are unlikely to win this cultural sort of battle, if you will. Okay? So the first work that we do in cultural storytelling is to provide people with examples, metaphors, and images from our culture to make sense. The second work, if you think about that as the demand generation, going back to our problem statement of why doesn't the Hindu priority get reflected in public policy? Clearly, we also know the vacuum in the state design and institutions. So the supply side, if this is the demand generation work that we need to do, the supply side has to think about what is the dharmic design for education, for political systems, for economic systems, and cultural systems. Clearly, it needs a lot more than just one, two, 300 institutions. So from our perspective, we think about education as the force multiplier, and the moral imagination that Indian knowledge systems provides, along with a set of tools for practice. We'd like to mainstream them in education. So our work is riding on the shoulders of giants like Kapil Kapoorji, who's here, is about advancing Indian knowledge systems into new areas of academic courses. So we help universities build IKS based courses. We help faculty development programs that build certain competencies to teach these. And we also try and create public design communication. There are five areas or five stakeholders which we think need to be worked upon for the education overall that all of us like speaking about, but there needs to be a little bit more systematic thinking around this, we feel. So what first is there has to be a political will. There has to be an executive commitment that there is a change in the curriculum, in the way we conclude decisions based on education. They have to be restructured. The second and very critical level of acceptance is at the academic leadership. Do academic leaders today, whether they are administrators or teachers or researchers, do they have the conviction to actually engage in Indian knowledge systems and take up IKS based curriculum? The third level, which needs to be brought into the fold, is industry. Do people in the industry, can they have a bias for taking people coming from these streams? Do they see that as better rounded human beings, which are that are going to help their businesses? Fourth level, we need to work with the parents. We need to make sure that they have a bias towards Indian knowledge systems. And at the fifth level, we need to work with young people who have aspirations of a certain life. And we need to tick the boxes in their mind that if I follow an IKS based liberal arts, I am equally, if not better, suited for the world as my peers who are coming from, let's say, any Ivy League, Western liberal arts. So we have work at 5 levels, from policy communication to academic leadership, building the competencies, to making sure that industry has a bias for it, that parents have an awareness, and students have a preference. This is the work that we do, work with government institutions, universities, private institutions to advance this. So at the last level, all of these things, whether you're thinking about cultural storytelling, the creative power of these mediums and how you use that, or you're thinking about education reform, none of this is going to happen without people who embody that consciousness. This is what we call civilizational leadership. And we work with young people who want to be in this for the long haul. This is not going to be an easy journey. This is not going to be a rewarding journey in the typical sense of that word. This is going to be a hard path, and you need to have the intellectual, moral, and emotional resources to endure. So, our work at Bruhat is to make sure that we identify and work with and are totally committed to create opportunities for people who want to be on this path, who want to actually think about culture in a certain way, understand it intellectually, work at it diligently, and also build the intellectual resources from our knowledge systems to institutionalize that. So, 3 areas of our work that we focus on: cultural storytelling, for just making sure that people's stories are from our culture, institutionalizing that in the form of curriculum and faculty competencies in the universities, and investing in people so that they carry that embodied consciousness. Right. All of this is not possible without the team that we have. It's a small team, 10 of us. I get to represent it most of the times, but I ride on the shoulders of people much better than I am. Pankaj is here. He will talk shortly about Chaturabodh and Swayambodh, the framework that we want to offer to organize, self-organize, and be modular and have a learning pathway. We have people ranging from performing arts to even MBBS doctor background, to product strategists, to people who were actually teaching culture for the Western audience as part of Indian Embassy. It's a small team. We work very closely, and our aim is to be a cultural interlocutor, to be the ally for people when they want to come back. And if you are starting to explore the world, we want to be the beacon that helps you, the map that you can carry with you to explore. If you wander and get lost, we'll also light the lamps on the way back. So that's what we hope to do. So जैसे मैंने बोला था, हम लोग 3 काम करते हैं: कल्चरल स्टोरी टेलिंग एंड IKS बेस्ड करिकुलम एंड एकेडमिक वर्क एंड लीडरशिप डेवलपमेंट. So here is the set of programs or initiatives that we have done. First one is Bruhat Anveshi. So if you look at cultural rewiring, if you want to look at that, it is not going to happen just by reading about it. That's one thing that's necessary but not sufficient. You need to have tactile experiences. You need to actually touch, feel your culture in a way that talks to you, and you need to see the beauty yourself. So one of the things that we do with Pankaj's deep work in temple traditions and temples across Bharat, we curate cultural tours with temples as the focus. We take delegations through the, usually it's a circuit tour. We've done Hoysala circuit 2 times now. Next is Odisha, and after that we plan to take a delegation to Chamba. But the way it's curated is to help you get a full-blown understanding of what this institution called temple means. Art and aesthetics, iconography, architecture, local ecosystems, sacred geography, economic systems, the whole landscape. So we curate an experience to make sure that you get the real immersion into what it means to be a yatri. So that's one thing that we've done. We've taken 2 delegations already in the last 6 months. We're taking another one now. We also produce a lot of short form video content. We call it Bruhat Mridang, and we would expand this into long form content shortly. But through this, we want to tell the stories of our culture in bite-sized formats. The first series that we've done about 10 videos, is on the metaphors of Indian art, where we try and help people understand and relate to every single icon that we see, from bija, stamba, to chakra, to every single cultural motif that you have. What is the unifying philosophy behind all of this? And how does it tie the entirety of Bharatiya Gnan Parampara? What does it mean in Natya Shastra? What does it mean in some other darshana? What does it mean in poetics? So we try and create short video formats to stitch a coherent picture of the things that we see but perhaps don't understand. Right? We write a lot. We are just a week under 6 months now. We have written about 57 long form essays. So we publish one long form essay either on Indian knowledge systems or temple traditions or culture or cultural interpretation, one every 3 days. We're fairly productive in that sense, and I would request those of you who are interested to check out our DT blog. We are also doing some fundamental research on the history of Rig Veda and what we call the synaptic reconnections to civilization. Thinking about it from linguistics, thinking about it from history, and what are some rampways that we can build. So how do you think about continuity from Vedic times to today? So a lot of research that we collate under this project called Fractal Mandala, where the idea is to help people realize the concentric circles that are interlinked in the civilizational design, right, from the individual all the way to the cosmic. We do a lot of online courses. We've offered one of the conceptions we have is a civilizational worldview 101. We call it the fire keepers of civilization. How do you build a basic idea of the thinkers and their main ideas when you think about the civilizational worldview? Under Bruhat Drashta, we offer online programs where we've just covered Sri Ram Swarup ji and Sri Sitaram Goyal ji. Pankaj had taken both of those sessions about maybe 20 hours each. We have identified 9 schools of thought, beginning with Voice of India, but Sri Aurobindo, Swami Vivekananda. We will also be building on Dharampal's school of social thinking. So all of our civilizational thinkers in the last 200 years who articulated a civilizational vision, all of those are being converted into online courses, and we offer that. Fairly good response. For Ram Swarup ji, we had about 150 people joining that. For Sitaram Goyal ji, we had about 80 people joining this. So these are open programs that we run at fairly accessible and personalized time scale level. We offer a curated set of learning resources called the Bruhat Open Library. I'd love to show it to you on the website. And we've organized this to make sure that whatever your area of interest is, if you're somebody who likes history, you can start from history and look at the knowledge systems. If you want to go to darshanas, you have darshanas organized in a manner that you can consume. If you want to go explore the Puranas, we have a section where all the Puranas are stored. We're going to upload all the Upanishads shortly. So this is an open library with the idea that we curate a set of learning resources to make sure that it talks to your starting point. Right? So these are some actions that we've taken. And on the IKS, we partner with the Ministry of Education to do faculty development programs, to build curriculum for them. Just shortly, in about 3 days from now, we are helping IIT Kharagpur inaugurate their 14-day faculty development program on Bharatiya Gyan Parampara, where we are the knowledge and the public design partner for them. And we create a set of resources, both scholars and learning resources, for anybody who wants to build courses on Indian knowledge systems. So it's on the website and also on YouTube. The videos are on YouTube and other mediums. The curriculum, of course, is more institutional. Right now, we are offering it to institutions. And all of our course material, sir, is also available on the Open Library.
When the Narendra Modi government came to power, 2014, probably not connected with that fact, probably just a coincidental synchronism, the RSS announced that it was going to train 5,000 volunteers to go to village squares and so on, to public places, to give a retelling of the Mahabharata, because they had found that the knowledge of the Mahabharata was going down. Now, that seems to me the kind of thing that you can do when you're totally in the opposition. You have this, Boy Scout effort of let's all do our best. Now, in the earlier years, that was perhaps the only thing that could be done. When you had a Hindu government, this seemed to me rather silly, because rather than have 5,000 people spend their free time, you can just have one education minister, doctoring the curriculum a bit, and to make sure that everybody, who goes to school in India studies the Mahabharata. So where do you fit in, and what do you think about the government's role in principle and in reality vis-a-vis this particular task?
Sure. I'll borrow from a framework that I use to think about these problems. So there are different leverage points. Right? There are the shallow leverage points and there are the deep leverage points. I think the idea of and it is okay if there are different organizations based on their propensity and their DNA are working at different levels. But I agree with you. I do not think that this idea of 5,000 people going to all villages is the most effective or the most enduring way for any kind of civilizational consciousness. You have your state, you have your policy. That is precisely why I said you need to focus on the deep end of this, which is the public policy, which is the state action. And I also concur that there is a gap between what we could do with a Hindu government at the center and what we've achieved. That said, in the engagement that I have, particularly on the Indian knowledge system side, I also see an increasingly greater openness. At least the air cover has been provided for a lot of activity to happen. For example, you have Indian knowledge system division within the Ministry of Education today, which is doing a lot of groundwork. They are providing the compass for people to have IKS centers, for people to take up IKS projects. They're also leveraging the institutional architecture to create public design programs about policy and knowledge systems. So I do see, and Pankaj will probably talk a little bit about it, but when we think about the cultural phenomenon, I think it goes through three phases. You have the naive phase, where the same tools that we're using even before you had power, you think it's the same tools that need to be amplified. You probably do not understand the new resources and new methods you would have just having the state access. The sophisticated phase is where I think both at a societal level, the debate and discourse goes from the merely political and electoral arithmetic to the knowledge systems, through the culture, and through the metaphysical level. I see a bit of that happening, but simultaneously, there is also a lot of noise around the political dimensions. I think we have two pathways from here. One, we can get into the sophisticated phase and use that to institutionalize, but there is also a danger that we will miss the sophisticated phase completely and leapfrog into a decadent phase. I hope, and the work that we do is to avoid that fall into decadence, but actually steer it towards a sophisticated phase through knowledge system discourse. Thank you so much. Namaste.
That's wonderful.